Imagine this. You wake up one morning, and instead of your room, you're standing in a wooden house, somewhere in medieval Japan. The air smells of damp earth and wood smoke. You hear the clashing of swords outside, the neighing of horses, and the cries of warriors. Welcome, you've just stepped into the age of the samurai. Let's settle in and allow the noise of the modern world to fade away. We are about to drift back through 8 centuries of history, a story of profound isolation and explosive change, of serene art and brutal warfare. This is the story of Japan. Our journey begins in the late 12th century. For years, the imperial court in Kyoto had been the center of Japanese culture, a world of perfumed silks, intricate poetry, and subtle courtly manners. But while the aristocrats painted scrolls, real power was slipping through their fingers, flowing into the hands of provincial warrior clans. The culmination of this shift was the Genpei War, a bitter 5-year struggle between the two most powerful clans, the Taira and the Minamoto. Imagine fleets of simple wooden boats clashing on the inland sea, samurai in ornate armor engaging in single combat, reciting their lineage before clashing blades. It was a war that ended in 1185 with the decisive naval battle of Dan no Ura, where the Minamoto clan, led by the brilliant Minamoto no Yoritomo, emerged victorious. Yoritomo was a pragmatist. He knew that the old courtly system was broken. In 1192, he established a new form of government, the bakufu, or tent government, in his provincial hometown of Kamakura, far from the influence of Kyoto. He took the title of shogun, or great general, becoming the de facto ruler of Japan. The emperor remained, a divine and revered figurehead, but the age of the warrior had officially begun. Life under the Kamakura shogunate was defined by the principles of Bushido, the way of the warrior. It was a code of absolute loyalty to one's master, strict self-discipline, and martial skill. The sword wasn't just a weapon, it was the soul of the samurai. This new order faced its greatest test a century later. From the vast continent, the Mongol Emperor Kublai Khan sent emissaries demanding Japan submit to his rule. The samurai, fiercely independent, refused. In 1274, and again in 1281, the Mongols launched 2 of the largest naval invasions in history. Imagine the shoreline, bristling with samurai defenders, watching as a seemingly endless armada appeared over the horizon. The samurai fought bravely, but they were outnumbered. And then, on both occasions, a miracle occurred. A massive typhoon descended upon the Mongol fleet, smashing their ships and forcing a retreat. The Japanese called this storm the kamikaze, or divine wind, believing their gods had protected them. They had been saved, but the cost of defense had been immense, weakening the Kamakura shogunate and paving the way for the next, more turbulent chapter. The unity of the Kamakura period eventually crumbled, plunging Japan into a century of chaos known as the Sengoku Jidai, the Age of Warring States. From the mid-15th to the early 17th century, the country was fractured. The authority of the shogun was non-existent, and Japan became a patchwork of domains ruled by powerful feudal lords, the daimyo, each with their own army, their own castle, and their own ambition to rule all of Japan. It was an era of constant betrayal and incessant warfare. A farmer could rise to become a general. A trusted vassal could assassinate his lord. Yet from this crucible of conflict, 3 extraordinary figures emerged, who would ultimately unify the nation. The first was Oda Nobunaga, a brutal, brilliant, and ambitious daimyo. He was a master of strategy who recognized the power of the new firearms introduced by Portuguese traders. He systematically armed his foot soldiers with arquebuses, shattering traditional samurai cavalry tactics. He was ruthless, crushing his enemies without mercy, but he was the first to make significant headway in unifying the fractured country. After Nobunaga was betrayed and assassinated, his most talented general, Toyotomi Hideyoshi, took his place. What's remarkable about Hideyoshi is that he was born a peasant, a man of humble origins in a society defined by birthright. He completed the unification of Japan through a combination of military conquest and shrewd diplomacy. To prevent the kind of social mobility that allowed him to rise, he famously initiated a sword hunt, confiscating weapons from the entire peasantry, cementing the samurai as the sole armed class. But it was the third unifier, the patient and cunning Tokugawa Ieyasu, who would truly cement the peace. After Hideyoshi's death, Ieyasu made his move. At the legendary Battle of Sekigahara in 1600, the largest samurai battle in history, he decisively defeated the remaining rival daimyo. 3 years later, he was declared shogun, establishing the Tokugawa dynasty that would rule Japan for the next 250 years. The age of war was over. Tokugawa Ieyasu moved the capital to his small castle town of Edo, which would one day grow into the metropolis of Tokyo. What followed was the Edo period, an unprecedented era of peace and stability. The samurai, with no wars to fight, slowly transformed from warriors into a class of administrators and bureaucrats. To ensure no daimyo could ever challenge him again, Ieyasu implemented a clever system of control called sankimikotai, or alternate attendance. All daimyo were required to live for a year at a time in Edo, and when they returned to their own domains, they had to leave their wives and children behind as hostages. This constant travel was enormously expensive, draining the finances of potential rivals and keeping them under the shogun's watchful eye. It was during this long peace that the shogunate made a fateful decision. Wary of the influence of Christian missionaries and foreign powers, they instituted a policy of sakoku, or closed country. Japan was sealed off. Foreigners were expelled, Japanese were forbidden from leaving, and trade was restricted to a single tiny, man-made island in Nagasaki Harbor called Dejima, where only the Dutch and Chinese were allowed to conduct limited business. This isolation fostered a uniquely vibrant and creative domestic culture. With peace and growing cities, a new merchant class, the chonin, emerged. Though technically at the bottom of the social hierarchy, they grew wealthy and became patrons of the arts. This was the era of the ukiyo, or floating world, a culture of pleasure and entertainment. Imagine the bustling theaters of Edo, where dramatic kabuki plays with elaborate costumes and makeup captivated audiences. Picture artists like Hokusai and Hiroshige creating beautiful ukiyo-e woodblock prints, depicting everything from famous landscapes, like the Great Wave off Kanagawa, to beautiful courtesans and celebrated actors. It was also the time of the great haiku master, Basho, who penned his simple, profound verses while wandering the countryside. Japan, in its quiet isolation, was a world unto itself. But the floating world could not float forever. In July 1853, the peace was shattered. 4 massive American steamships, puffing black smoke and armed with modern cannons, sailed into Edo Bay. Commanded by Commodore Matthew Perry, they carried a letter from the U.S. President demanding that Japan open its ports to trade. The Japanese called them the Kurofune, the Black Ships. The arrival of the Black Ships was a profound shock. It exposed how technologically far behind Japan had fallen. The country was thrown into turmoil. Was the shogun, who signed a humiliating treaty with the Americans, capable of defending the nation? A powerful movement arose with the slogan Son no Joi, revere the emperor, expel the barbarians. After a brief but decisive civil war, the last Tokugawa shogun abdicated in 1868. The young Emperor Meiji was restored to the center of power, moving his court from Kyoto to Edo, which was renamed Tokyo, the eastern capital. This was the Meiji Restoration. It was not a return to the past, but a revolution from above. Under the motto Fukoku Kyohei, enrich the country, strengthen the military, Japan embarked on one of the most rapid and astonishing periods of modernization the world has ever seen. Feudalism was abolished. The samurai class was dissolved, their right to wear swords in public revoked. A modern, Western-style army and navy were created. The government sent missions to Europe and the United States to study everything from constitutions and banking systems to postal services and industrial technology. Factories were built, railways were laid, and a national education system was established. In just a few decades, Japan transformed itself from a reclusive, feudal society into a modern, industrial nation-state, desperate to stand on equal footing with the Western powers. This newfound strength soon led to new ambitions. Japan, resource-poor and now equipped with a powerful military, looked to build an empire of its own, just as the Western powers had done. In 1894, it went to war with China over influence in Korea, winning a swift victory. A decade later, in 1905, it shocked the world by defeating Russia in the Russo-Japanese War. It was the first time in modern history that an Asian power had defeated a major European one. Japan was now a global player. But its success fueled a growing and aggressive nationalism. As the military gained more influence over the government in the 1920s and 30s, Japan's path grew darker. Believing expansion was essential for its survival, Japan invaded Manchuria in 1931 and launched a full-scale invasion of China in 1937. The dream of modernization was morphing into a nightmare of imperial conquest. Japan's ambition set it on a collision course with the United States, culminating in the surprise attack on Pearl Harbor in December 1941. This act plunged Japan into the vast Pacific theater of World War II. The early years of the war saw stunning Japanese victories across Southeast Asia and the Pacific, but the tide turned at the Battle of Midway in 1942. What followed was a brutal island-hopping campaign drawing ever closer to Japan's home islands. The war was devastating, not just for the soldiers, but for civilians at home who faced firebombing raids that reduced cities like Tokyo to ash. The conflict reached its terrible climax in August 1945. In an effort to force a surrender and avoid a costly invasion, the United States dropped 2 atomic bombs, first on the city of Hiroshima and 3 days later on Nagasaki. Faced with this unimaginable destruction and a Soviet declaration of war, Emperor Hirohito made the unprecedented decision to surrender. From the age of the samurai to the ashes of the atomic age, Japan's journey has been one of extremes. After the war, it rose again, this time not as a military power, but as an economic giant, once more transforming itself with remarkable speed and determination. As we drift back to the present, the echoes of clashing swords and chanting monks, of bustling Edo markets and the roar of modern factories fade into a quiet hum. The long, complex, and fascinating story of Japan comes to a rest. Perhaps now a gentle sleep will come, filled with the images and stories of this incredible island nation.